Titan hit the cage wall so hard, the entire structure shook. 200 pounds of Belgian Malinois teeth exposed, eyes locked, body coiled to destroy whatever moved first. Voss pointed at Emily and said, "Get in." She walked through the door without hesitating. The latch slammed behind her. Titan charged. Every recruit on the yard flinched backward. Then 3 feet from her throat the dog stopped. His growl died. His body dropped. He sat at her feet and pressed his head against her hand like he had been waiting years for her to come back. Voss's face went white. "Who are you?" he whispered. The morning that Emily Carter arrived at Naval Special Warfare Training Base Redstone, she carried one bag, signed in with 2 words, and sat in the corner of the intake room without speaking to anyone. The other recruits filled the silence, the way nervous people always do. Trading names, comparing backgrounds. Measuring each other up before the real measuring even started. A former Army Ranger named Becker was already telling stories about his last deployment. 2 ex-Marines near the window were laughing too loud. A younger man named Daniel Brooks sat slightly apart from the group watching, learning the room. He noticed Emily immediately. Not because she stood out, because she didn't. She had the kind of stillness that didn't come from shyness. It came from discipline, the kind you couldn't fake. Daniel watched her set her bag beside her chair with a specific kind of care, the way someone handles equipment, not luggage. He watched her scan the room once, catalog every exit, every face, every potential problem. And then she stopped. She stopped, folded her hands, and waited. He almost said something to her. He didn't get the chance. Chief Instructor Marcus Voss walked in, and the room stood up like a single muscle contracting. Voss had been at Redstone for 11 years. He was the kind of man who believed every recruit was either an asset or a liability, and his entire career had been spent sorting them into those 2 boxes as fast as possible. He was good at it. He had a reputation for reading weakness from across a room. His trainees either washed out in the first week or graduated harder than they'd ever imagined possible. There was no middle ground with Voss. There never had been. He walked the line slowly, stopping to look at each recruit the way a butcher examines a cut of meat. When he reached Emily, he stopped longer than anywhere else. "Name," he said. "Carter, Chief. Emily Carter." "Previous service." "None on record, Chief." Voss tilted his head. Something in his expression sharpened. "None on record," he repeated very slowly, like he was tasting the words. "That's a strange way to answer a simple question, Carter." "I answered what you asked, Chief." The room was absolutely quiet. Voss let the silence stretch long enough to make several recruits visibly uncomfortable. Then he stepped back and moved on without another word. But he kept looking at her. Everyone noticed. The first week of training at Redstone was designed to separate anyone who had romanticized military service from anyone who had actually lived it. The schedule was brutal by design. Sleep windows were 4 hours on the best nights. Physical requirements stacked on top of each other without recovery time. The instructors ran psychological pressure alongside every physical exercise, shouting contradictory orders, punishing initiative, punishing hesitation, waiting to see who cracked and how. Emily didn't crack. That bothered Voss more than if she had been difficult. Difficult recruits gave him something to work with. A recruit who pushed back could be disciplined. A recruit who broke could be rebuilt or removed. But a recruit who absorbed everything without reacting, who performed exactly what was required, and nothing more, gave him nothing to grab onto. No edges. No openings. By day 4, he was watching her during every drill. By day 6, he had begun to suspect she was hiding something. On the morning of day 8, he called her out in front of the entire platoon. "Carter, front and center." She walked forward without rushing, stopped at exactly the right distance, and stood at attention. "You want to tell me why your form in the combat scenario yesterday looked like it belonged to someone with a decade of field experience?" "I work hard, Chief." "That's not an answer." "It's the answer I have, Chief." Becker laughed from somewhere in the back row. It was a quiet laugh, the kind meant to be heard by everyone except the person being laughed at. A few others smiled. The social math of the training yard was always clear: Whoever the instructor targeted became the person you distanced yourself from. Nobody wanted to be standing too close when someone washed out. Voss heard the laugh. He didn't stop it. Instead, he looked at Emily and said, "You think you're better than everyone in this yard? No, Chief. You think your silence makes you superior? No, Chief. Then explain to me," he said, stepping closer, his voice dropping in a way that was somehow louder than shouting, "why you look like you've already done everything I'm asking you to do." Emily held his gaze. "Because I learn fast, Chief." Voss stared at her for a long moment. Then he said, "Tomorrow morning you're on K9 perimeter duty. You handle intake assessment on the new working dogs." Several recruits exchanged glances. K9 intake assessment was considered one of the most dangerous routine assignments on the base. The dogs brought in for evaluation were untested, unpredictable, and often coming off high-stress transport. Handlers with years of experience approached intake animals with extreme caution. Assigning a recruit with no listed animal handling background to that post was either a test or an attempt to manufacture a failure. Everyone assumed it was the second. Emily said, "Yes, Chief," and walked back into formation like he had assigned her to sweep the barracks. Daniel found her that evening, sitting alone near the edge of the yard, eating without looking at her food, watching the tree line. He sat down nearby and waited to see if she'd acknowledge him. She didn't look over, but she didn't move away either. He decided that was close enough to an invitation. "That was a power move," he said. "The K9 assignment." "It was an assignment," Emily said. "Come on, Voss is trying to get something on you." She looked at him for the first time. Not unkindly, just directly. "He doesn't have to try to get something on me. He just has to watch long enough." Daniel frowned. "What does that mean?" She looked back at the tree line. "It means Voss is good at his job, Brooks, better than most people here give him credit for. He's an intimidator. He's a reader," Emily said. "He sees things other people dismiss. The fact that he's watching me means he already knows something is off. He just doesn't know what it is yet." Daniel was quiet for a moment. "What is it?" he asked. "What's off?" Emily smiled. It was the first time he had seen her smile. It was small, contained, and entirely calm. "Go get some sleep," she said. "Tomorrow's early." He went. But he couldn't stop thinking about what she'd said. He just has to watch long enough. What kind of recruit talked about their own instructor like that? Not with bitterness, not with resentment, but with something that sounded almost like professional respect from an equal. The K9 intake assessment. The following morning brought 3 new working dogs to the base facility. 2 German Shepherds recently transferred from an overseas deployment and a Belgian Malinois named Titan, who arrived in a reinforced transport crate with a warning placard bolted to the side. The handler who delivered Titan briefed the duty sergeant outside Emily's earshot. Daniel wasn't supposed to be there. He'd traded a shift with another recruit to be close enough to watch. He heard fragments. 2 incidents in the last month. Put Sergeant Flores in medical for 4 days. Will not accept contact from handlers he hasn't cleared himself. The duty sergeant looked at the paperwork, looked at the crate, and looked at Emily standing 10 feet away. "She's a recruit," he said quietly. "Those are my orders, Sergeant," the handler said and left. The duty sergeant walked over to Emily. He had the expression of someone about to apologize for something he hadn't done personally. "Carter, Titan's a problem animal. I want you to stay back and observe. Don't engage. I'll get someone experienced down here in the next 20 minutes. "Understood," Emily said. The duty sergeant went inside to make the call. Emily walked toward the crate. Daniel started to say something. She held up one hand, the smallest gesture, and he stopped. She crouched in front of the reinforced crate close enough to be well inside the danger threshold that the warning placard specified. She didn't speak. She didn't reach out. She simply settled into stillness the same way she'd sat in that intake room on the first day and waited. Titan moved inside the crate. Low growl. The sound of a heavy body shifting testing. Emily didn't move. The growling increased, then stopped. Titan's nose appeared at the mesh. Emily waited. The dog huffed once a long, slow breath out and went quiet. Daniel didn't realize he'd been holding his breath until he let it out. When the duty sergeant came back outside 2 minutes later with an experienced handler at his side, Titan was sitting calmly in his open crate with Emily at the mesh door, and the dog's massive head was resting against the wire while she spoke to him in a voice too low to hear. The experienced handler stopped walking. "What did she do?" he said. "Nothing," Daniel said. "She just waited." "Nobody just waits with Titan." "She did." Chief Voss heard about the Titan incident before lunch. He didn't react the way Daniel expected. He didn't assign Emily a commendation or ease off. He went quiet in a way that was more dangerous than shouting the way pressure builds before something breaks. That afternoon, he called a full platoon assembly near the K9 facility. "Carter, out here." Emily walked to the center of the yard. Voss pointed to the large steel containment cage near the facility wall, the structure that most recruits didn't even know the purpose of until they'd been at Redstone long enough to hear the stories. It was original to the facility's construction. Iron frame, concrete floor, 3 steel walls, and 1 reinforced chain-link face. During extreme psychological training cycles, it was used as a controlled stress environment, enclosed exposed, watched by an entire group. Titan and 2 other military working dogs had been moved inside for the afternoon rotation. "Get in," Voss said. The yard went absolutely still. Someone in the back row whispered, "He can't do that." Nobody responded. Emily looked at the cage, then at Voss. "Chief, I want to confirm the order." "I said get in, Carter." She walked to the cage door, unlatched it, and stepped inside. The door closed behind her. The latch dropped. Every recruit in the yard was watching. Nobody spoke. Becker, who had been performing confidence all week, looked genuinely shaken. The 2 ex-Marines near the fence stood very still. Even the training staff lingered uncertain. The 3 dogs reacted immediately to a new presence in their space. The 2 shepherds began circling the perimeter-controlled aggression testing boundaries, reading the unknown variable. Titan rose from where he'd been resting and locked onto Emily from across the enclosure. Voss addressed the platoon without taking his eyes off the cage. This is what happens when someone thinks their silence makes them above the process. When a recruit believes they don't owe this program an explanation. "You want to carry secrets into my training yard, Carter. Let's see how far your secrets carry you in there." Emily stood in the center of the enclosure. Both shepherds had completed 1 full circuit and were tightening their approach. Titan was still, watching. She didn't move toward the dogs. She didn't retreat. She stood exactly where she was, her breathing visible, and controlled her hands loose at her sides. The first shepherd reached her and drove its muzzle hard into the back of her knee. A test, not an attack, but not gentle. Emily shifted her weight forward, absorbed it, and did not look down at the dog. She kept her eyes level and soft, unfocused, not making contact with anything directly. The second shepherd came around her left side and stopped. The yard held its collective breath. Titan walked forward. He crossed the full length of the enclosure at a measured pace, not rushing, not stalking, just moving with absolute intent. The 2 shepherds both stepped back slightly as he passed them, deference they would not have shown to most handlers. He stopped 3 feet in front of Emily. She still didn't move. He took 1 more step. 2. Close enough now that a wrong breath in either direction would have mattered. And then Titan sat down. He dropped his hindquarters to the ground, raised his head, and looked at her, calm, alert, focused. Like he was reporting in. Like he knew her. The yard didn't erupt. It went more silent. The kind of silence that falls over people who have just witnessed something they don't have language for. Voss's jaw tightened. Daniel, watching from the formation line, saw it happen, saw the moment Voss understood he had miscalculated something significant, and saw the moment Voss chose anger over acknowledgement. "Carter." His voice was different now, controlled but rigid at the edges. "What did you do?" Emily looked through the chain link at him. "Nothing, Chief." "That is not nothing." "I stood still," she said. "That's all." "Nobody stands still with Titan." "I wasn't doing anything to him, Chief. I was just already there when he decided to come over. Voss stepped closer to the cage. Where did you learn animal handling? I didn't say I had. I'm asking where. The pause lasted exactly 1 beat too long. Not because Emily was searching for an answer, because she was deciding how much of one to give. Some things I learned in places that don't come with paperwork, she said. Voss stared at her. Then he turned to the duty sergeant. Open the gate. Emily walked out of the cage without looking back. Titan watched her leave and did not follow, but he did not move back to where he'd been resting. He stayed at the edge of the enclosure and watched the chain-link door until it closed. Voss dismissed the platoon without another word. That evening, Commander Adrian Cole reviewed the security footage from the K9 facility. Cole was not part of the training command structure. He held a separate authority-based intelligence security clearances, threat assessment. He had learned years ago that the most interesting things that happened at any military installation were always the things nobody had filed a report about yet. He watched the footage 3 times. He was not looking at the dogs. He was watching Emily. Her entry into the cage was not the movement of a frightened person forcing herself forward. It was the movement of someone executing a known protocol. The way she established her position in the center of the enclosure was specific, not random. The way she held her hands, the angle of her body, the deliberate avoidance of direct eye contact with the animals. It was textbook K9 behavioral de-escalation technique. High-level technique. The kind taught in programs that Cole had security clearance to know existed, and that he was absolutely certain were not listed in Emily Carter's file. He pulled the file again. It was thin. Technically acceptable birth records, education, physical assessment scores, intake paperwork, all present and consistent. But thin in a way that was almost architectural. Like someone had built a structure with just enough material to hold up under casual inspection without providing anything you could actually grip. Cole had seen files like this before, not often. 3 times in 11 years. And each time the person attached to the file had been someone who didn't officially exist anymore. He picked up his phone and called a contact he hadn't spoken to in 2 years. The contact answered on the second ring, which meant he was either waiting for the call or the caller ID had already told him something important. Cole, the contact said, not a greeting, just an acknowledgement. I need information on a recruit, Emily Carter, current intake at Redstone. A pause. Stop, the contact said. I haven't asked the question yet. You don't need to. I know what you're calling about. Another pause. Cole, stop searching. Cole leaned back in his chair. That's an unusual instruction. It's the right one. There are people above both of us who decided that file looks the way it looks for a reason. What kind of reason? The kind that gets people reassigned to places they didn't choose. The voice on the other end was not threatening. It was tired. The voice of someone who had learned something the hard way and was trying to save someone else the same lesson. Walk away from this one. Cole looked at the frozen frame on his monitor. Emily Carter standing in the center of a cage completely still, while a war dog that had hospitalized experienced handlers sat at her feet like a puppy. I'll think about it, he said, and ended the call. He did not walk away. He started a separate file. Off the base system. Personal encryption. He titled it with her name and a question mark, and he began to fill it in from every available angle, because in 11 years of intelligence work, Cole had learned one reliable truth. When someone powerful tells you to stop looking, you are usually one step away from finding something that changes everything. The night before the first major field exercise, Daniel couldn't sleep. He sat outside on the steps of the recruit barracks and listened to the base settle into quiet, the distant movement of security patrols, a K9 team working the far perimeter, the low mechanical hum of the facility infrastructure. Normal sounds. The sounds of a place that ran in every direction at once, even when most of the people in it were still. He heard footsteps and looked up. Emily was crossing the yard at an angle that didn't match any path to any building. She was walking like she was thinking and thinking, like she was working something out. Hey, he said. She stopped and looked at him. not surprised. She'd already noted where he was before he spoke. "Can't sleep?" she asked. "You either—" She came over and sat on the step below him, which put her at a slightly lower position than he expected. It was the first time she'd placed herself anywhere but level or above in a conversation. He got the sense it was intentional, that she was offering him something. "What happens tomorrow?" he asked. "The Field X. What's Voss going to do?" "He's going to push harder than last week," Emily said. "Whatever you think you're ready for, double it, then double it again. And you'll—" He paused. "You'll be fine." She looked at him sideways. "Why do you say it like that?" "Because you're always fine," Daniel said. "And nobody's always fine. Not like you are. Not the way you hold everything together while everyone else is coming apart." He stopped himself. "I'm not saying it as a compliment. I'm saying something is off, and I want to understand what." The quiet between them was different from the quiet Emily usually carried. This one had weight, like she was carrying something she'd been carrying for a long time and was briefly acknowledging that it was heavy. "I told you on day one," she finally said. "Some lessons come from places you don't survive twice." "That's not an explanation." "No," she agreed. "It's not." "Then what is—" She was quiet for a long moment. "I'm here because I owe people something," she said. "Not this program, not Voss, not a rank or a record. People, specific people. And until I finish what I started, I can't stop." She stood up, and the moment of openness closed. Not rudely, just completely. "Get some sleep, Brooks. Tomorrow matters." She walked back inside. Daniel sat on the steps for another hour. He had the feeling he'd just been handed a piece of something without knowing what the whole shape of it was. That he'd been trusted with a fragment and would have to wait to understand what it connected to. He didn't know yet how right he was. He didn't know that the woman who had just walked back into the barracks was carrying something none of them could see. A mission that had nothing to do with training a name that wasn't her name, and a grief so deep and so organized it had become the architecture of everything she did. He didn't know. But Titan did, and somewhere in the K9 facility. At the far end of the base, the most dangerous dog on the installation was lying with his head on his paws facing the direction of the recruit barracks. Waiting. Voss didn't sleep that night. Daniel knew this because he saw the light under the chief instructor's office door at 2 in the morning when he got up to use the head, and he saw the same light still burning at 4:30 when the base alarm pulled everyone out of their racks. Whatever Voss was doing in there, it wasn't paperwork. A man like Voss didn't lose sleep over paperwork. He lost sleep over problems he couldn't categorize. And Emily Carter had become exactly that, a problem without a category. The platoon assembled in the pre-dawn dark, and Voss came out of his office, looking like a man who had made a decision during the night and was now committed to it, regardless of where it led. His jaw was set. His eyes moved straight to Emily and stayed there for exactly 2 seconds before he addressed the group. 25 miles, he said. Full kit. Carter leads. Nobody spoke. 25 miles in full combat load across the desert terrain north of the base was a 4th-week exercise. They were in week 2. And putting a recruit at the front of the formation, responsible for navigation pace setting and group cohesion, was not a reward. It was a mechanism for manufacturing a specific kind of failure. If the leader pushed too hard, the group fell apart, and it was her fault. If she eased up, Voss would call it weakness. There was no correct answer. That was the point. Emily moved to the front of the formation without being told twice. Becker fell in behind her and leaned close enough to mutter, "Don't blow this for all of us, Carter." She didn't respond. They moved out. The first 3 miles were manageable. Terrain was rough but familiar. The pace steady. The group holding formation without serious strain. Daniel settled into the middle of the column and watched Emily's back. She didn't check over her shoulder. She didn't adjust her pace based on the sounds behind her. She moved like she had calculated a sustainable speed before they started and was simply executing it, trusting the math. By mile 6, 2 recruits were struggling. Their breathing had gone ragged and uneven, the kind of sound that meant the body was starting to negotiate with itself about what it could actually sustain. Emily slowed the pace by 3%, small enough that Voss couldn't call it a stop, large enough that the two struggling recruits could bring their breathing back under control. Voss walked the column's edge. "Carter, you're dropping speed." "Maintaining sustainable pace, Chief." "I didn't ask for sustainable, I asked for lead." "A leader who loses half her unit by mile 10 hasn't led anyone anywhere, Chief." The column went tense. Daniel watched Becker's shoulders tighten ahead of him, the involuntary reaction of someone who expected an explosion and was bracing for shrapnel. Voss didn't explode. He said very quietly, "Keep moving," and dropped back. Daniel exhaled. Mile 8 hit the first serious elevation, a long punishing grade that stole whatever rhythm anyone had built and replaced it with raw will. The two recruits who'd been struggling earlier started falling back. A third joined them. The column was beginning to accordion, the back end stretching away from the front, and that was how formations broke, not all at once, but one gap at a time, until the gaps outnumbered the connections. Emily stopped. Not a full stop. A controlled halt. She turned and looked back at the column with the calm, assessing gaze of someone reading a situation she had already planned 3 responses for. "Close it up," she said. Not loud, not angry, just certain. "Martinez, move left, let Huang draft off your shoulder. Brooks, close the gap behind Becker. Keep your eyes on the person in front of you, not the top of the hill." People moved. They moved not because she outranked them. She didn't, but because the instruction was delivered with a precision and a confidence that created no space for argument. It was the kind of voice that expected compliance not through intimidation, but through absolute clarity. The kind of voice that had given orders before, many times, in places where wrong orders cost more than a training evaluation. Daniel moved into position and realized his hands had gone cold despite the heat. She shouldn't sound like that, he thought. Nobody in week 2 sounds like that. They crested the elevation, and Emily pushed the pace back up immediately, using the downhill to rebuild momentum and let the group's legs recover without stopping. It was textbook interval management. Push, recover, push, and it worked. By mile 12, the column was tighter than it had been at mile 3. Becker pulled up beside Daniel during a flat stretch. "She's done this before," he said low enough that only Daniel could hear. "Done what?" "Led a march. A real one." Becker was former Army Ranger. He knew what he was looking at. The way she's managing the column, the pacing intervals, the way she called that correction back there, that's not something you learn in a gym, Brooks. That's field experience. She said she had no prior service. "She said nothing on record," Becker corrected. "That's not the same thing." Daniel chewed on that for the next 4 miles. At mile 16, a recruit named Harmon went down. It wasn't dramatic, no collapse, no cry. He simply stopped moving forward, sat down on the ground with his hands on his knees, and stayed there. Heat exhaustion, probably. Maybe dehydration. His face had gone the wrong color, and his eyes weren't tracking right. Voss materialized at the rear of the column. "Leave him. Medic call goes in, column keeps moving. That's protocol." Emily had already turned back. "Carter." Voss's voice was steel. "Protocol." "Harmon," Emily said, crouching beside him, ignoring Voss entirely. "Look at me. Right here." She snapped her fingers once sharp in his direct eyeline. His gaze found her face. "Good. You're not done. Your legs quit, not you. Can you stand?" "I don't." Harmon's voice was thick. "I didn't ask what you think. I asked if you can stand." Something crossed his face. Not offense. Something closer to recognition, like her certainty had reached past his body's argument and found whatever part of him was still functional. He got up. He was slow. He was unsteady. Emily took a position at his left shoulder without touching him close enough that if he went down, she could catch him far enough that he was doing it himself. They finished the last 9 miles with Harmon in the column. Voss said nothing. But when the platoon crossed the finish point and Harmon finally sat down for real and didn't have to get back up, Voss stood 30 feet away and watched Emily with an expression Daniel couldn't read from that distance. It wasn't admiration. It wasn't anger. It was something more complicated than both. It was the look of a man recalculating. Commander Adrian Cole had spent the better part of 48 hours building a picture from negative space. Emily Carter's file had nothing wrong with it. That was the problem. A file that had nothing wrong with it was a file that had been deliberately constructed. Normal people had messy records gaps, inconsistencies, changed addresses, jobs that didn't quite connect to the next jobs. Normal people left the kind of administrative residue that built up naturally over a life. Emily Carter's file was clean in a way that required effort. Specific professional effort. Cole had started where the file ended at the intake point. He pulled her physical assessment scores from the first week of training, cross-referenced them against the database of all recruit intake scores from the previous decade. Emily's scores placed her in the 97th percentile for someone her age. That alone wasn't impossible. Elite athletes existed. Dedicated individuals trained hard. But the score distribution was wrong. Her numbers were too even. In a normal high-performing recruit, you saw spikes and valleys, exceptional strength or exceptional endurance or exceptional cognitive scores, with the other categories trailing slightly behind. That was the human pattern. Emily's scores were uniformly exceptional across every category. Physical endurance, reaction time, stress response, tactical problem-solving under time pressure. Uniform excellence across every category was not the profile of an athlete. It was the profile of an operator. Cole contacted the National Personnel Records Center through a secure channel and requested a search on Emily Carter's name against all active, inactive, and classified service records. The response came back in 4 hours. The fastest he had ever received a response on a records request, which itself told him something. The response said, "No records found." Cole stared at that message for a long time. Then he requested a search under every variation of the name. Different middle initials, different birth year ranges, different spellings, nothing. He widened the search to physical description matches in classified personnel databases. Height, weight, distinguishing characteristics from the medical intake form. He had to go through 3 separate authorization layers to access that search, and each layer required him to document his reason for inquiry, which meant he was leaving a trail, which meant someone would eventually see what he was looking for. He did it anyway. The search returned one partial match. The match was flagged at the highest classification level Cole had access to. He could see that a record existed. He could see that it was associated with a Naval Special Warfare Unit designation he didn't recognize. Not a standard SEAL team number, something else. Something with an internal code name that the system rendered as a string of asterisks because his clearance level wasn't sufficient to decrypt it. He could not see the name attached to the record. He could not see the photograph. He could see one thing, the record's status field. It read, "Deceased Operational Loss File, sealed per NSC Directive." Cole sat back in his chair and felt something cold move through him that had nothing to do with the temperature in the room. Deceased. The record was for someone who was dead, or someone who was supposed to be. He picked up his phone, called his contact again, and this time didn't let the man speak first. "The record I found. The sealed one. NSC Directive. Deceased. Operational loss." Silence on the other end. "Tell me I'm wrong," Cole said. The contact's voice, when it came, was very quiet. "Cole, I'm going to say this one time and I need you to hear it. What you're looking at, if you're looking at what I think you're looking at, that situation is being managed at a level that neither of us has any business being near. The people running that file are not the kind of people who accept interference politely. Someone is walking around this base under a dead person's file. Yes. That doesn't alarm you. It terrifies me," the contact said. "Which is exactly why I'm not going to look any closer. And why you shouldn't either." A pause. "But you're going to anyway, aren't you?" Cole looked at his monitor. At the asterisks where a name should have been. At the word deceased sitting in a field that was supposed to describe a living person. "Yeah," he said. "I am." The night after the 25-mile march, Daniel found Emily doing something he hadn't expected. She was in the base library, a small underused room that most recruits walked past without going into, sitting at a table with a topographical map spread in front of her and a set of handwritten notes arranged beside it, with the careful organization of someone who had been doing this for a long time. She wasn't studying the map the way a recruit studied. She wasn't trying to learn it. She was looking for something specific. Her finger traced a route, stopped, moved back, stopped again. Daniel stood in the doorway. She heard him. He was sure of it. The slight shift in her posture said she'd registered his presence, but she didn't look up. "You going to come in, or just watch?" she said. He came in and sat across from her. "What is that?" "A map." "Of where?" She folded the corner of it down without answering. The part she concealed was the section her finger had been tracing. "Brooks." She looked at him directly. "Why do you keep following me?" The question wasn't hostile. It was the kind of direct, calibrated question that expected a direct, calibrated answer. "Because nobody here makes sense to me the way you don't make sense," he said. "And I've spent 2 weeks trying to decide if that means you're dangerous or if it means you're the only real thing in this building." She considered him for a moment. "Those aren't mutually exclusive." "I know." She almost smiled. "Not quite. Harmon finished today because of you," Daniel said. "You know Voss is going to come at you harder for that. You broke protocol in front of the whole column." "Harmon finished today because Harmon chose to finish," Emily said. "I just gave him something to push against." "That's not how Voss saw it." "I know how Voss saw it." "Then why?" "Because Harmon matters," she said, and the simplicity of it landed like something much heavier than a simple sentence. "Not as a training statistic, not as a column headcount. He matters. And if I walk past a person who matters because a protocol says to, then I'm exactly the kind of operator I spent years making sure I would never become." Daniel stared at her. "What kind of operator?" The word sat between them. Emily looked at him, and for a moment he saw something shift behind her eyes, a quick internal calculation, a decision being made in real time. "Go to sleep, Brooks," she said. "You keep saying that. You keep not doing it." He stood up, paused at the door. "The map," he said. "Is it something to do with why you're here? The real why?" She looked back down at the folded map. "Get some rest. Tomorrow Voss runs the obstacle circuit and he's going to double the water obstacles because the weather report says it'll be cold. Wear the liner under your base layer." He stared at her. "How do you know what Voss has planned for tomorrow?" "Because I've been watching him for 2 weeks," she said, "and I know how he thinks when he's angry." Daniel left. He lay in his rack and stared at the ceiling and thought about what she'd said. "I know how he thinks when he's angry," and realized that described a level of situational analysis that went far beyond a recruit managing a difficult instructor. That was surveillance. That was the ongoing disciplined observation of a subject by someone trained to read behavioral patterns and predict outcomes. That was intelligence work. He'd been in enough briefings in his previous service to recognize the shape of it. The question that kept him awake wasn't who Emily Carter was. It was why she was here, and whether whatever had brought her to Redstone was something that would eventually pull every person around her into it. Voss doubled the water obstacles. He also added weight to the standard kit and cut the rest intervals in half, and stood at every checkpoint with a clipboard making notes that nobody could see. The message was clear. Without being stated, he was building a case, documenting performance, looking for the specific failure point that would give him grounds to flag Emily Carter for review or removal. He didn't find it. She hit every obstacle clean. Not fast, she wasn't performing for speed, but with a technical efficiency that erased the possibility of finding fault in the execution. The water obstacles in cold conditions required a specific management of breath and body temperature that most recruits learned through painful trial and error over multiple training cycles. Emily moved through them like someone who had done this in actual cold, actual water, actual conditions, where getting it wrong had consequences that a training evaluation couldn't measure. Becker caught up to Daniel on the back half of the circuit. They ran side by side for a moment, both watching Emily clear the fourth water station 30 yards ahead. "I called a buddy of mine last night," Becker said between controlled breaths. Former Ranger Intel. Asked him about classified K9 units in naval special warfare. Daniel kept his eyes forward. And he got quiet. Then he said there's a unit, or there was a unit that nobody talks about. Ran joint operations with specially trained military working dogs in high-risk extraction scenarios. Real black budget stuff. He said the unit went dark about 3 years ago after an operation went bad. Went dark how? The whole team, Becker said. Gone. No bodies recovered. No official acknowledgement. The military declared them lost and sealed everything. The circuit checkpoint was ahead. They hit it and kept moving. He said the unit had a call sign, Becker continued. Shadow Cerberus. Daniel said nothing. He also said the team leader was a woman, Becker said. One of the most decorated operators in the program's history. K9 specialist. Extraction expert. He said her name was... Don't, Daniel said. Becker looked at him. Don't say the name, Daniel said. Not here. Becker studied him for a moment and then nodded slow, like he understood something he hadn't fully articulated yet. You already know, he said. I don't know anything, Daniel said. And neither do you. And we're going to keep it that way until we understand what's actually happening. Brooks. She's here for a reason, Becker. And if we start pulling at it before she's ready for it to be pulled, we could blow something that matters. Matters to who? Daniel thought about what Emily had said in the library. Until I finish what I started, I can't stop. To people who aren't here anymore, he said. Becker ran in silence for the rest of the circuit. Cole got the second hit on his search at 2200 hours that evening. He had expanded his inquiry into the operational history of naval special warfare classified detachments, specifically units with K9 integration components, pulling from a database that required him to submit a formal access request, which he had done under a cover reason that was technically accurate and strategically incomplete. The database returned results for 11 units. 10 of them had standard documentation chains. The 11th had a documentation chain that terminated abruptly, not archived, not transferred, but simply ended corresponding to a date 3 years prior. He cross-referenced the termination date against incident reports filed around the same period. He found a flag. A classified incident report, accessible only in summary form at his clearance level, described an extraction operation in a denied area that had resulted in complete team loss. No survivors listed. No remains recovered. The operation's outcome had been attributed to equipment failure and hostile engagement. The report was co-signed by 4 senior officers. Cole knew all 4 names. 3 of them were still in active senior positions within the Naval Special Warfare Command structure. The 4th had retired 18 months ago and was now working as a defense contractor with 3 government contracts, currently active contracts that Cole's access allowed him to see existed but not to see the contents of. He stared at those 4 names for a long time. Then he opened a new search window and typed in the name of the defense contractor. The retired officer was now working for. The company's registered address was 40 miles from Redstone Base. Cole's hands went still on the keyboard. He thought about Emily in the library with the folded map. He thought about the section she'd concealed when Daniel walked in the section her finger had been tracing before she heard footsteps. He pulled up a base area map and looked at what was 40 miles north of Redstone. There was nothing out there. Or rather, there was nothing on the public record. A stretch of federal land that the map designated as restricted. No facility name, no designation, just a perimeter line and an access restriction code. Cole knew the access restriction code. He had used it before twice in connection with classified facility access requests for high-value intelligence operations. That code designated a black site. An installation that didn't officially exist, run by people who officially had nothing to do with it. 40 miles from Redstone. 40 miles from Emily Carter. Cole closed his laptop, sat in the dark of his office, and understood with absolute clarity that the woman everyone on this base thought was a strange recruit with unusual skills was not here to train. She was here because whatever had killed her team was still operating, and she had come back to find it. The question that hit him next was fast and cold and practical if she was right. If there was an active network connected to the deaths of her unit, connected to a facility 40 miles from here, then the people running it would eventually realize she was alive. And when they did, they would send someone to finish what the original operation had started. Cole reached for his phone, then stopped. If he called this in through official channels, he would be reporting to people who reported to people who might include the names on that co-signed incident report. He put the phone down. He was going to have to handle this differently. He was going to have to handle this quietly, and he was going to have to be very, very careful about who he trusted next. The morning of day 15 began like every other morning at Redstone. The alarm, the dark, the cold air, and the sound of boots on concrete. The smell of coffee from the mess that nobody had time to finish properly. But Daniel noticed something different before the platoon even assembled. The training staff were tighter than usual. The duty sergeant had made 2 calls on his radio in the space of 10 minutes, both brief, both with his back turned. Voss was late to the yard, which had never happened. When Voss finally appeared, he looked at Emily before he looked at anyone else. And Emily was already looking at him. Not with challenge, with attention. The steady professional attention of someone who had registered a change in the environment and was processing what it meant. Voss called the platoon to order. Change of schedule, field assessment, full kit in 20 minutes, individual performance evaluation, wilderness navigation, threat, identification, and emergency response protocols. He paused. Carter, your primary navigator. Becker cut a look at Daniel. Daniel kept his face neutral. Individual field assessment with Carter as primary navigator in an unfamiliar sector was Voss's most sophisticated attempt yet. Navigation required decision-making under uncertainty. Emergency response protocols created variables that couldn't be controlled. Threat identification under field conditions introduced stress that stripped away any performance that was artificially maintained. If Emily was performing at a level she hadn't actually earned, this was designed to expose it. If she had actually earned it, it would prove something Voss wasn't ready to accept. They were in the field for 6 hours. In the second hour, Emily identified a navigation discrepancy in the briefing coordinates, a subtle error that would have driven the team 2 miles off course and into a sector with active training ordnance. She flagged it quietly, corrected their heading, and kept moving without announcing what she'd done to the rest of the group. Daniel noticed. He didn't say anything. In the 4th hour, a simulated emergency scenario went sideways when one of the props, a controlled explosive charge meant to simulate an IED encounter, misfired and injured a training assistant with shrapnel. Not a simulation. An actual injury. Blood. Confusion. The training staff around them went into genuine emergency response, and the recruits scattered into uncertain territory between following their drill protocols and reacting to something real. Emily was already moving before anyone else processed what had happened. She covered the distance to the injured training assistant in seconds, assessed the wound with her hands before asking a single question, and looked up at Voss, who had arrived at a run, and said, "Arterial bleed left forearm. I need a tourniquet. I need someone calling medevac right now, and I need everyone else back 10 feet. Her voice was not panicked. It was not performing calm. It was the actual calm of someone who had made these assessments before, in conditions where the person bleeding wasn't a training assistant with a support structure behind him, but a teammate with no backup and no margin. Voss threw her his personal tourniquet without saying a word. She had it applied in under a minute. The medevac arrived 14 minutes later. The training assistant was stabilized. He would keep the arm. When the medevac left, the field went quiet, in the way that real emergencies quiet. A space not peaceful, but emptied out. All the pretense of training suddenly gone. Everyone aware that something true had just happened in the middle of something manufactured. Voss stood 10 feet from Emily. She was sitting on the ground beside the spot where the training assistant had been, her hands resting on her knees, looking at nothing. Not shaken. Just present with what had happened the way you were present with something that had weight. Voss crouched down to her level. And for the first time since Emily Carter had arrived at Redstone Base, his voice lost the edge. "Where did you learn that?" he said quietly. Emily looked at him. Really looked at him, not assessing, not managing. Just two people in a field where something real had just happened. "I learned it," she said, "the first time I couldn't." Voss held her gaze for a long moment. Then he stood up and walked away, and began organizing the column's return to base without another word. But Daniel had been close enough to hear, and what he heard in her voice, not the words but the thing underneath the words, was grief. Old grief. The kind that had been carried long enough to become quiet, but never fully went away. He understood in that moment that Emily Carter had not come to Redstone Base to train. She had come here because she was looking for something. And whatever she was looking for, she believed she was getting close. Cole found her at 5:30 the next morning, not in the barracks, not in the mess. He found her exactly where he expected to find her, once he understood what she was actually doing at Redstone, at the base perimeter fence on the northeast side, the side that faced the restricted federal land 40 miles out, standing with her hands in her pockets and her eyes on the horizon, like she was reading something written in the distance that nobody else could see. He walked up beside her, and stood there for a moment without speaking. She didn't look at him. "Commander Cole," she said. "You know who I am." "I've known who you are since day 4, Emily said. "Base intelligence officer, 11 years at Redstone, 2 commendations for threat assessment, 1 formal reprimand for exceeding authorized inquiry scope in 2019. She paused. "You've been building a file on me." Cole was quiet for a moment. "Yes." "How far did you get?" "Far enough to find a sealed record with a NSC directive and the word deceased in the status field," he said. "Far enough to find 4 names on a co-signed incident report. Far enough to find a defense contractor 40 miles from here with a registered address that sits on top of a black site that isn't supposed to exist." Emily turned and looked at him for the first time. Her expression didn't change, but something in her eyes sharpened the way a person's focus sharpens when they hear a piece of information that either confirms a theory or opens a door they hadn't found yet. "The contractor," she said. "What's the name?" "Meridian Defense Solutions." She turned back to the horizon, said nothing. But her jaw tightened by a fraction, the smallest physical response, the kind that meant the name landed somewhere specific. "You know it," Cole said. "I know the people behind it," she said. "Then you know the names on that incident report." "2 of them," she said. "The other 2 I've been trying to identify for 3 years. Cole felt the weight of that number settle on him. 3 years. 3 years of carrying a sealed file and a dead team, and a mission that officially never happened, building toward a moment that required her to walk back into a training program she had already completed at a level most of its graduates never reached, under a name that wasn't hers, in a base 40 miles from the people she was hunting. "How long have you been planning this?" he asked. "Since the day I understood that going through official channels would get me buried next to my team," she said. "The people who signed that report are still inside the command structure, Commander. If I flag this through normal inquiry, it reaches them before it reaches anyone who can act on it. I needed proximity. I needed a reason to be here that nobody would question." "A recruit," Cole said. "A recruit nobody looks at twice," she said. "Except Voss. Voss doesn't know what he found. Not yet." She looked at him steadily. "And that's why I need you to decide right now which side of this you're on. Because what I'm about to do in the next 72 hours either ends with accountability or it ends with both of us in a sealed file with a NSC directive attached." Cole held her gaze and felt the particular clarity that came at the moments in a career when everything you had built toward either meant something or it didn't. "Tell me everything," he said. She told him in pieces, the way you told someone something that had been classified for so long, it felt physically wrong to say out loud. Her name was Commander Natalie Hayes. She had spent 8 years inside a Naval Special Warfare classified detachment called Shadow Cerberus, a joint unit integrating specially trained military working dogs with human operators for high-risk extraction and intelligence gathering in denied areas. The unit had a perfect operational record for 6 years. Then 3 years ago, they had been handed a mission that didn't come through their normal command chain. The mission was framed as an extraction, a high-value intelligence asset in a denied area. time-sensitive, requiring the unit's specific K9 integration capability. The briefing was clean. The authorization codes were legitimate. The team deployed without question because they had no reason to question it. They were 12 hours into the operation when the asset turned out to be a fabrication. There was no extraction target. There was only a kill box, a pre-planned engagement designed to look like hostile contact. Someone had fed them a false mission to get the entire unit into a location where they could be eliminated cleanly. Their deaths attributed to operational loss in a denied area, and the record sealed before anyone could ask the right questions. Natalie survived because Titan had pulled her out. The dog had sensed the ambush before she did, had broken from the formation. 15 seconds before the engagement opened, and she had followed his movement by instinct, the same instinct that 8 years of working with that animal had built into her reflexes. She had hit cover. She had waited. She had listened to her team die in a kill box designed by people who were supposed to be on the same side. She had made it out with Titan, a field radio that no longer had anyone to call, and the beginning of an understanding that would take her 3 years to fully map. Someone inside the Naval Special Warfare Command structure had ordered the elimination of her entire team. The reason was the intelligence they had gathered in the 6 months before the mission. Intelligence about a covert network using classified military infrastructure, including the Black Site 40 miles from Redstone, to run operations that had nothing to do with national security and everything to do with making specific people extraordinarily wealthy. Her team had been getting close. Someone had noticed. So they had been erased. Cole listened to all of it without interrupting. When she finished, the base had begun to wake up around them. Sounds of the morning routine filtering out from the buildings, recruits, moving staff vehicles crossing the lot. The world running its normal course completely unaware. "The 4 names on the report," Cole said. "You know 2. Who are the other 2? "That's why I'm here," Natalie said. "The contractor Meridian is the financial end of the network, but it has 2 silent partners that my intelligence doesn't cover. 2 people inside the current command structure who signed off on the incident report and have been running interference on any inquiry that gets too close ever since." She looked at him. "They're not at Redstone, but someone connected to them is. Someone on this base has been passing information to Meridian. That's the thread I'm pulling." Cole's blood went cold. "You think there's an active asset on this base?" "I don't think," she said. "I know. 3 separate intelligence inquiries in the past 2 years have been flagged and shut down within 48 hours of initiation. The only way that happens consistently is if someone with base access is monitoring inquiry traffic." Cole thought of his own contact's warning. "Stop searching." The call that had come back almost too fast. The contact who had known immediately what he was asking about without being told. He thought about who he had called, and felt the floor shift under him. "Cole." Her voice was sharp. She'd read something in his face. "What just happened?" "The contact I called when I first started pulling your file," he said slowly. "He told me to stop. He called back within 2 hours of my initial inquiry. That's..." He stopped. "That's too fast," she said. "Yes." "Who is he?" Cole named him. Natalie was very still for 3 seconds. Then, "Say that name again." He said it again. She turned away from him and looked at the horizon and was quiet for long enough that Cole began to wonder if he had just destroyed something or completed it. "How was in my unit's support chain," she said finally. 3 years ago. He processed our mission authorizations." She turned back to Cole, and her eyes were the flattest, clearest, most dangerous thing he had seen in 11 years of working next to special operations personnel. "He's not a thread. He's the connection. He's the one who verified the authorization codes on the false mission." The morning kept moving around them. A truck crossed the lot. Someone laughed in the distance. Titan, being walked by a K9 handler on the morning perimeter route, paused 50 yards away and looked in their direction. "We have maybe 48 hours, Natalie said. "If your contact flagged your inquiry, then Meridian already knows someone at Redstone is looking. They'll want to know how much you found. They'll move to contain it." She looked at Cole with the directness of someone issuing an operational order. "I need access to base communications records for the last 6 months. Specifically outbound encrypted traffic that doesn't correspond to official base operations. Can you get that? It'll trigger an access log. I know. If someone's monitoring, then we'll know who within 6 hours of the request, she said. That's not a liability, that's a trap. Cole looked at her for a long moment. At this woman who had been dead for 3 years, who had come back under a false name and walked into a cage full of war dogs and survived 17 days of training that was designed to break her without showing a single crack. Not because she was unbreakable, but because she had already been broken by something so much worse that Voss's methods registered as noise. All right, he said. I'll pull the records. One more thing, she said. What? Daniel Brooks, the recruit who's been following me. Cole raised an eyebrow. He's former signals intelligence, she said. He left the army under circumstances that were officially described as a medical separation. The actual reason is in a file that you probably have access to and that he doesn't know you can see. She held Cole's gaze. I need to know if his being here is a coincidence. Cole didn't answer immediately. Because the answer wasn't yes or no. It was something more complicated. I'll check his file, he said. Voss called her into his office at 0800. Natalie had expected it. After the field assessment the day before, after the tourniquet. After the question he had asked her on the ground, and the answer she had given him, she had known he would want a closed-room conversation. Voss was many things, but he wasn't someone who left a question mark sitting unaddressed. She sat across from his desk and waited. He stood with his back to her for a moment, which was unusual. Voss was not a man who turned his back on a conversation. When he finally turned around, he looked like someone who had been fighting with himself and had arrived at a position he wasn't entirely comfortable with. The tourniquet application yesterday, he said. One-handed modified technique arterial pressure point location confirmed before application. That's a field trauma protocol from a specialized advanced training program. He sat down. I looked it up last night. It's taught in exactly 2 places. One of them is the Special Operations Medical Pipeline. The other is a classified joint service program that doesn't have a public designation. Natalie said nothing. Carter. He leaned forward. I have spent 17 days trying to find the crack in you. Not because I wanted to break you. Because something that has no crack is either made of something extraordinary or it's made of something false, and I needed to know which one I was dealing with. He paused. Yesterday told me which one. What did yesterday tell you? She said. That you've held someone's life in your hands before, he said, and lost it, and that you carry that with you every day as the reason you don't fail. His voice had none of its usual edge. I've seen that in operators who've been through things nobody comes back from whole. I've never seen it in a recruit. He held her gaze. Who are you? Natalie looked at him for a long moment. I'm someone who needs to finish something, she said. And I need this base and this position and these 17 days of being nobody to stay intact for a little while longer. That's all I can give you right now. That's not an answer. No, she said. It's a request. Voss studied her face. The way he studied everything, looking for the tell, the inconsistency, the thing that didn't track. He didn't find it. Not because she was performing, but because what she was saying was completely true. How long, he said. 48 hours, she said. Maybe less. He was quiet for a long time. The K9 cage, he said finally. His voice changed on those words. The edge came back, but it was a different edge now. Not authority, something closer to regret. I put you in there to humiliate you, in front of the entire platoon. I believed you were hiding arrogance behind silence, and I wanted to expose it. He stopped. I was wrong about what you were hiding. Yes, she said simply. I'm not going to apologize for doing my job. I'm not asking you to, but I am going to tell you. He stopped again, started over. If what you're carrying is what I think it is, if the thing you need to finish involves people you lost, then I want you to know that what happened in that cage doesn't represent what this base stands for, or what I stand for, at my best. He held her gaze. I haven't always been at my best. Natalie looked at him. really looked at him the way she rarely allowed herself to look at anyone without the filter of operational calculation. I was telling her the truth. Imperfectly. With the difficulty of a man who had built an identity around not needing to say things like this. 48 hours, Chief, she said. Then you'll know everything. She stood up and walked out of his office. In the hallway, she let out a breath that she had been holding without realizing it. Cole sent her the communications records through an encrypted channel at noon. She pulled them up on a base terminal during the lunch window, seated at an angle that made her screen invisible to the rest of the room, and worked through them with the speed of someone who knew exactly what pattern they were looking for. Outbound encrypted traffic, non-standard protocols, irregular timing, the signature of someone routing communications through a base connection to an external receiver, using the base's own security as cover. It was a technique she had seen before in intelligence briefings that were now 3 years old and sealed. The network that had taken her team had been using this method to maintain internal communication for at least 2 years before the operation that ended Shadow Cerberus. She found the first signal marker in week 3 of the records. Then 7 more spread across 6 months, each one patterned around specific events. A base security review, an outside inquiry that had been quietly closed, a personnel change in the K9 unit. Someone was reporting on base activities. Regularly. To someone outside the perimeter. The terminal address of the outbound traffic traced to a specific building on the base. The administrative wing. She cross-referenced the access logs for that terminal with the duty roster. 3 people had regular access. 2 of them had verifiable alibis for several of the transmission windows logged in other locations visible on security footage. The third was a staff officer named Captain Reed, Administrative Liaison, between the Training Command and the Naval Special Warfare Oversight Structure. Quiet. Unremarkable. The kind of person who moved through institutional spaces without generating friction or attention. The kind of person who had been in exactly the right position to monitor inquiry traffic and flag it upstream. Natalie stared at Reed's name for a long time. Then she typed a single message to Cole. Found your asset. Reed, Admin Wing. Pull his outside contact records for the last 6 months and tell me if Meridian Defense Solutions appears anywhere in his personal communications. The response came back in 4 minutes. 3 calls. 2 emails. 1 wire transfer to a private account. $60,000. 14 months ago. $60,000. 14 months ago. Exactly 2 months after Cole had filed a routine security review that had been quietly redirected and buried before it reached the oversight board. Reed had been paid to bury it. Natalie closed the terminal, stood up, and walked out of the mess with her tray, moving at the measured pace of someone who had just confirmed a critical intelligence position and needed to think 4 steps ahead before taking the next one. She was almost to the door when Daniel fell into step beside her. "You found something," he said quietly. She looked at him sideways. "Why do you think that?" "Because you're walking the way you walked on the navigation exercise right before you corrected the coordinates," he said. "Like you're moving through space, but your mind is already 3 places ahead." She stopped walking, turned to look at him properly. "Cole ran your file." Daniel's face went very still. "And your separation from the army wasn't medical," she said. His jaw tightened. "No. You filed an internal report about a signals intelligence operation you believed was being misused. The report was suppressed. You were given a choice between quiet separation and a formal inquiry that would have gone nowhere and cost you everything." She watched his face while she said it. "You took the separation." "Yes." "The operation you reported," she said. "What was it?" He looked at her for a long moment. "Unauthorized surveillance of a Naval Special Warfare classified detachment," he said. "Someone was running active monitoring on a black unit's communications. I couldn't identify who authorized it. When I flagged it, I was told it was a sanctioned counterintelligence operation, and I didn't have the clearance to understand what I was looking at." "But you didn't believe that?" "No," he said. "Because sanctioned counterintelligence operations don't get buried the moment someone writes them down." Natalie was very quiet. The unit being monitored the surveillance operation that Daniel Brooks had flagged from inside Army signals intelligence 3 years ago and been separated for reporting, she already knew what it was. Because there had been a period in the final months before the mission when her team had noticed anomalies in their communication security. Small things. Static patterns that didn't match their equipment's baseline. Traffic response times that were fractionally off. They had assumed it was technical interference. It hadn't been. Someone had been listening to Shadow Cerberus for months before they sent the team into the kill box. And Daniel Brooks, an Army signals analyst who had never met her, who had separated from service over a report that went nowhere, had been the one who tried to stop it. "Brooks," she said, and her voice was different now, stripped of the management she usually applied to it, carrying something more direct and more personal than anything she had allowed herself since she walked through Redstone's front gate. "You tried to protect my team 3 years ago. You didn't know that's what you were doing. But that's what it was." He stared at her. "The unit being monitored," she said. "That was Shadow Cerberus." Daniel said nothing for a full 5 seconds. His face moved through several things. Connection. The specific pain of understanding that something you did years ago in the dark, without result, without acknowledgement, without even knowing what it was attached to, had mattered, had been real. "Who were they?" he said quietly. "My team," she said. He closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, whatever uncertainty had characterized his relationship with Emily Carter, with Natalie Hayes, for the past 17 days, was gone. Replaced by something simpler and more solid. "What do you need?" he said. "I need your signals background," she said. "I have a communications trail and a confirmed asset. I need to trace the upstream contact, find who Reed was reporting to inside the command structure. The 2 names I don't have yet." "How long do we have?" "Cole ran a records access that will register on the monitoring system. When Reed sees it, he'll know someone is onto him. He'll alert upstream." She checked her watch. "We have 8 to 12 hours before this closes." "Then we'd better move," Daniel said. They worked in Cole's office, all 3 of them, with the door locked and the room swept for monitoring devices. Natalie had done the sweep herself with equipment. Cole didn't ask her to identify spread around the desk, with 6 months of communications records, signals traffic analysis, and the financial thread that connected Reed to Meridian, and Meridian to the 2 unnamed officers. Daniel was fast. Faster than she had expected, even knowing his background. He moved through signals data with the instinctive pattern recognition of someone who had spent years learning to find the signal inside the noise, and what he found in Reed's encrypted traffic over 3 hours of analysis was a routing chain that traced upstream through 2 commercial relay servers to a communications node inside the Naval Special Warfare Headquarters building. A node registered to a specific internal office, the office of Rear Admiral Stephen Greer, Oversight Director for Classified Naval Special Warfare Operations. One of the 4 names on the incident report. The room went very still when Daniel said the name. Cole stood up, sat back down. "Greer co-signed the operational loss report on your unit." "Yes," Natalie said. "He's also on the review board for the Black Site Facility Authorization," Cole said. "He has full oversight access to Meridian's government contracts." "He's the architecture," Natalie said. "He's the one who built the network, and he's the one who ordered the elimination of my team when they got too close to it." She looked at both of them. "We have the financial trail, the communications chain, and Reed as the active asset. That's enough to take to the Inspector General with a formal protected disclosure. If we go through the IG office directly, it bypasses Greer's oversight authority. He can't bury it." "He'll know it's coming," Daniel said. "The moment we file, his people will see the access flag." "Yes," Natalie said. "And that's when it becomes a race." She looked at Cole. "I need you to make the IG contact tonight. Formal protected disclosure, full documentation package. Everything we have." "And you," Cole said. "I need to do one more thing first," she said. Cole looked at her for a long moment. "What thing?" Natalie's expression was level and clear, and carrying something underneath that was not strategy, was not calculation, was something much older and more personal than either of those. "Harmon's alive because someone came back for him on the march," she said. "Titan's alive because someone at this base didn't give up on a dog that everyone else had written off. She looked at the records spread across Cole's desk. 6 months of a network protecting itself of money, moving of a team of people whose names were in a sealed file with the word deceased beside them. My team died 3 years ago because someone decided they were expendable. I came back to make sure the people who made that decision understand that there is no version of this where they get to walk away. She held Cole's gaze. I need to go get Reed before he runs. Cole nodded once. He picked up the phone. Daniel stood up and followed her to the door. Brooks, she said, stopping without turning around. You don't have to. I know, he said. I'm coming anyway. Titan was waiting in the K9 facility at the end of the building. When Natalie pushed open the door, the dog was already on his feet. Like he had known she was coming. Like he had been waiting for this exact moment for 3 years. Reed was already moving when they got to the administrative wing, not running. Running would have drawn attention, and Reed was too experienced at operating inside institutions to make that kind of mistake. But his office light was off when it should have been on his access card, had been used at the side exit 4 minutes before Natalie and Daniel reached the building, and the terminal he had been using for 6 months of encrypted transmissions had been wiped. Not logged off. Wiped. A clean slate command that took 12 seconds to execute and left nothing recoverable by standard forensic methods. Daniel looked at the blank terminal and said, "He knows." He knew the moment Cole pulled the communications records, Natalie said. She was already moving back toward the door. Cole's access flag triggered an alert in Reed's monitoring system. He had a contingency. He ran it. How far does he get? Not far enough, she said. Titan. The dog had been at her left side since the K9 facility. He moved with her the way he had always moved, not on command, not on leash, but in the synchronized way that 8 years of operational partnership built into an animal and a handler until the distinction between instruction and instinct disappeared. He was already reading her direction before she finished the word. She pushed through the side exit door. Reed was crossing the rear parking area at a controlled walk, a bag over one shoulder, his keys in his hand, his head down. He had 30 yards on them. His vehicle was another 50 yards beyond that. Reed, Natalie said. Not loud. Flat. The voice of someone who didn't need volume to carry authority. He stopped walking. Turned around slowly the way people turned when they had already calculated their options and found none of them acceptable. He looked at Natalie, then at Daniel, then at Titan, who had stopped 4 feet to Natalie's right and was absolutely still in the way that military working dogs went still when they were one signal away from full engagement. Reed's face moved through several things in rapid succession, recognition calculation, and then something that settled into a hard and careful neutrality. He was not a man who panicked. He was a man who managed situations. He had been managing this one for 14 months. He had been paid well to manage it. Carter, he said, using the name everyone at Redstone knew her by. Hayes, she said. Commander Natalie Hayes, Shadow Cerberus. And you already know that captain because you've known it since day 4 of my intake. Something shifted in his expression, just slightly. I don't know what you're talking about. $60,000, she said. 14 months ago, Meridian Defense Solutions, wired to a personal account that you opened 6 weeks before, under a name that's 1 letter different from your mother's maiden name. She took 1 step forward. You flagged Cole's inquiry the same day he made it. You've been monitoring base communication traffic for a year and a half, and routing anything sensitive upstream to Greer's office. You processed the authorization codes on the mission that killed my team. She stopped. I want to know who gave you the codes. Reed looked at her for a long moment. I want a lawyer, he said. You're not under civilian arrest, she said. You're being detained under military authority on suspicion of espionage, conspiracy, and accessory to the deaths of 11 naval special warfare operators. Those aren't charges that come with a phone call. They come with a holding facility and a JAG officer who is assigned to you, not chosen by you. She held his gaze. Or you can tell me who gave you the codes right now, and I can tell the IG office that your cooperation was immediate and substantive, which is the difference between life in a federal military prison and something that eventually lets you see daylight again. Reed's jaw tightened. His eyes moved to Titan and back to her face. You can't make that deal, he said. "You don't have the authority." "Commander Cole is on the phone with the Inspector General's office right now," she said. "Full protected disclosure, complete documentation package, your financial records, your communications traffic, your access logs, everything." She let that settle for exactly 2 seconds. The deal closes when Cole finishes that call. After that, what you say or don't say stops being relevant to your outcome. Reed stared at her. The morning was quiet around them. Wind. The distant sound of the training yard. A world going about its normal business without any idea what was happening in a rear parking lot on the northeastern edge of the base. "Hargrove," Reed said finally. The word came out like something he'd been holding at the back of his throat for a long time and had finally given up trying to keep. "Vice Admiral Marcus Hargrove. He runs the Meridian relationship from inside the Pentagon's acquisitions office. He's the one who built the network. Greer manages the operational security. Hargrove moves the money." He stopped, swallowed. "Greer gave me the codes. Hargrove authorized the mission." Natalie looked at him for a long, steady moment. Hargrove. The fourth name. The one she had been reaching toward for 3 years through dead ends and sealed files, and 17 days of being nobody at a base 40 miles from the facility that the network had been using as its operational anchor. Vice Admiral Marcus Hargrove. She took out her phone and typed the name into a message to Cole. The response came back in 90 seconds, already running. "IG has it. Federal Marshals contacted. This is moving." She looked back at Reed. "Turn around. Hands on the vehicle." He complied. His hands were shaking slightly, the fine tremor of someone whose carefully maintained composure had just reached its structural limit. Daniel stepped forward and secured him. Titan sat down beside Natalie and leaned his weight gently against her left leg. She put her hand on the top of his head. Neither of them moved for a moment. 3 years, 11 names, a sealed file, and a word that said, "deceased," and a mission briefing that had been a death warrant dressed up in legitimate authorization codes. Reed's hands against the vehicle were the first solid thing those 3 years had produced. It wasn't enough, but it was the beginning of enough. Cole met them at the administrative building's main entrance with 2 base security personnel and a look on his face that was equal parts controlled relief and barely contained urgency. "IG office has the full package," he said. "They're treating it as a priority protected disclosure. Federal jurisdiction invoked. Base commander has been notified he's in his office right now with the JAG officer, and he's furious, which means he's clean." He looked at Reed. "Get him to holding." The security personnel took Reed without ceremony and moved him inside. Cole turned to Natalie. "Hargrove," he said. "That's a vice admiral." "I know what it is. When that name hits the IG's office alongside Greer's name and the full financial trail..." He stopped, started again. "This is going to move fast, and it's going to move in ways neither of us can fully control. Once federal jurisdiction engages on a sitting. Vice Admiral, the response will be..." "Aggressive," Natalie said. "Yes." "From Greer's side or the IG's side?" "Both," Cole said. "Which is the problem?" She understood what he was saying without him having to finish it. A formal disclosure against 2 senior officers with this level of institutional reach created a window narrow and closing fast, during which the people being investigated had every incentive to move against the investigation's primary witness, which was her, and the people around her. "How long before federal involvement creates a protective layer?" she said. 6 hours minimum, Cole said. "Maybe 12. The IG has to verify the federal marshals have to coordinate the JAG office, has to establish jurisdiction. Until that's done, we're operating on base authority only. And base authority has limits when the people you're investigating outrank the base commander." "Then we have a window problem," Daniel said. "Yes," Cole said. "We do." Natalie's mind was already moving. The window. 12 hours of institutional exposure before the formal process created enough procedural weight to protect everyone involved. 12 hours during which Greer, who would know within the hour that Reed had been detained and that a protected disclosure had been filed, would be making decisions about how to manage what he couldn't contain. The question was what Greer would do with 12 hours, and the knowledge that his network was unraveling. She thought about the black site 40 miles north, about the Meridian contractor address, about the active facility that existed on no public record and ran on authorization codes that went through Greer's office. "He'll move the facility," she said. Cole looked at her sharply. "The black site. If the disclosure triggers federal jurisdiction, the facility becomes a liability. Any evidence of what Meridian has been running through it becomes evidence in a federal investigation. Greer will order it sanitized." She looked at Cole. "How long does it take to clean a facility of that type?" "Depends on what's in it," Cole said. "Document servers hours, personnel longer." "What if there are people in it?" she said. "Not personnel, people." The word landed differently than anything else she had said since the beginning of the morning. Cole went very still. "What kind of people?" "My team was declared dead," Natalie said. "No bodies recovered. That was in the incident report. In 3 years, I have never found any forensic evidence that they were actually killed in the field." She held Cole's gaze. "I've been afraid to say this out loud because it meant something I wasn't ready to face. But if Greer ordered an operation to eliminate my unit, and the unit was too valuable to actually kill—" "A facility," Cole said. "A facility 40 miles from here," she said. "That has been running on black budget funding channeled through a defense contractor for 3 years. That no one outside a specific authorization chain knows exists." Daniel put his hand against the wall beside him. Not for support, just to have something solid to touch. "Natalie," he said. Her real name. The first time he had said it. "If they're there." "I don't know," she said. "I don't know, and I can't know until someone goes there. But I know that if Greer gets 12 hours and an order to sanitize whatever answer exists at that facility disappears with everything else." She looked at Cole. "I need transportation, and I need it in the next 30 minutes. And I need it to be completely off the official record until the federal jurisdiction is established." Cole looked at her. Then he looked at Daniel. Then he looked at the K9 facility building where Titan had returned after Reed's detention, where the dog was visible through the window standing watching them. "I have a vehicle," Cole said. "And I have enough base authority to authorize a welfare check on a restricted federal property if I document it as a security concern flagged during an active disclosure investigation." He paused. "It won't hold up to scrutiny later." "It doesn't need to hold up later," she said. "It needs to hold up for 4 hours." "All right," he said. "I'm coming," Daniel said immediately. Natalie looked at him. "Brooks, you said I tried to protect your team 3 years ago," he said. "I failed. I'd like to try again with better information." She held his gaze for 2 full seconds. "Let's move," she said. Voss stopped them in the corridor between the administrative wing and the vehicle lot. He had clearly been looking for her. His face carried the controlled tension of a man who had been receiving information through unofficial channels and had arrived at conclusions he wasn't ready to sit with. "Carter." He caught himself. "Hayes." Natalie stopped. "Chief?" "Reed is in holding," Voss said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." "Cole filed something with the IG." "Yes." "The base commander has been in his office for 40 minutes with the JAG officer and the door closed." Voss looked at her steadily. "This isn't a training matter anymore." "No," she said. "It hasn't been for 3 years." Voss was quiet for a moment. The corridor was empty around them. His voice, when it came again, had none of its instructional authority. It was the voice of a man speaking directly without the armor of rank. "My training program," he said. "If there's something connected to this base, to people on this base, I need to understand what I've been running here. Whether my program has been used as a cover for something. Whether recruits I've been responsible for have been in proximity to an active threat." He held her gaze. "I need to know that, Hayes. You owe me that." She looked at him for a long moment. I was right. He had run a training program on a base where one of his own staff officers had been an active intelligence asset. He had pushed her, challenged her, put her in a cage in front of 50 people, and in doing all of it, he had inadvertently accelerated a timeline that was already moving. He deserved to understand the shape of what had happened around him. Reed was passing base security information to a network connected to the deaths of my team, she said. The network has a facility 40 miles north. The people running it include Greer and a vice admiral named Hargrove. The IG has the full package. Federal jurisdiction is being established. She paused. Your program was not compromised. Reed was an administrative liaison. He monitored communications traffic. He didn't have operational access to your training structure. Your recruits were never in direct danger. Voss absorbed this. The facility, he said. You're going there. Yes. Why? The answer cost her something to say. She said it anyway. Because there's a possibility that the people who were declared dead aren't. Voss's face changed. He looked at her. At this woman he had spent 17 days trying to break without understanding what she was made of, and something in his expression shifted into a territory that had nothing to do with rank or authority or the chain of command. Take Titan, he said. He's already coming, she said. Voss nodded once, then he stepped aside. As she passed him, he said quietly, Bring them home. She didn't stop walking, but she heard it. The vehicle Cole had arranged was unmarked and fast, and the road north ran through federal land that grew progressively emptier. The farther they went, scrub and rock and long stretches of nothing that the public maps described as restricted without explaining why. Natalie sat in the front passenger seat with Titan between her and the door. Daniel drove. Cole was in the back with his laptop monitoring the IG disclosure progress and maintaining a communications thread with the base JAG officer that was, for the moment, their only institutional lifeline. Nobody spoke for the first 20 minutes. Then Daniel said, How do you know it's still operational, the facility? The communications traffic Reed was routing didn't stop at Greer's office, she said. There were secondary transmissions in the data that Daniel's analysis pulled last night, low-frequency, irregular interval. The pattern matches a facility check-in protocol. Something at the endpoint of those transmissions is still active, still reporting in. What kind of facility check-in? Personnel accountability, she said. Daniel's hands tightened on the wheel by a fraction. If it's a personnel accountability protocol, Cole said from the back, then whoever is at that facility is being maintained, not stored, maintained. Yes, Natalie said. For 3 years, Daniel said. Yes. The road got rougher. The federal landmarkers became more frequent, standardized signage, perimeter warnings, access codes that Cole was running through a decryption sequence on his laptop based on the facility classification code Natalie had identified. Gates going to be automated, Cole said. Biometric or code-based. If it's tied to Greer's authorization chain, and Greer is already dealing with the disclosure. He won't have had time to lock down the facility's access credentials yet, Natalie said. The disclosure is less than 2 hours old. His priority right now is his own position, not the facility's gate security. We have a window. You hope, Daniel said. I know how he thinks, she said. He's going to call his lawyer before he calls the facility. That's who he is. That's who all of them are. They protect themselves first. The facility is a problem for after. She was right. The gate opened on Cole's second code attempt. What was inside the facility was not what any of them had let themselves fully imagine on the 40-mile drive, because imagination was a form of commitment, and none of them had been willing to commit to what the evidence suggested until the evidence was confirmed. The facility was active, staffed by 4 personnel who, when confronted with a base commander's authority letter and a JAG disclosure reference number that Cole delivered at the entrance, with the steady voice of someone who had made this particular calculation and was not backing down from it, stood aside with the immediate compliance of people who had been waiting perhaps for a long time for someone to arrive with the right paperwork. The personnel were not Greer's loyalists. They were contractors, Meridian employees, people who had been hired to manage a facility and had been managing it for 18 months without being given a full accounting of what they were managing or who had authorized it, and who had a survival instinct sharp enough to recognize that compliance with a federal disclosure officer was a significantly better outcome than being found on the wrong side of a vice admiral's obstruction of justice charge. There were 6 people inside. 6. Not 11. 6. Of the original 12 members of Shadow Cerberus 6 had died in the kill box. The other 6, the ones who had been positioned outside the primary engagement zone, the ones whose fate the incident report had listed as operational loss alongside Natalie's, had been here. 18 months in a facility that didn't officially exist, kept alive because they had intelligence value. Because the network that had tried to eliminate them had decided at the last moment that dead operators were a liability, but controlled operators were an asset. Because Hargrove was the kind of man who converted problems into leverage wherever possible. Lieutenant Commander James Reeves was the first one Natalie saw. How was thinner than she remembered. The specific thinness of institutional confinement, not starvation, but the slow erosion of a body that had been maintained at minimum function for an extended period. He was standing in the central corridor when she came through the door, because the facility staff had been running a morning routine, and the routine had brought him there, and for a moment neither of them moved. He looked at her the way people look at things they have stopped expecting to see. "Boss," he said. The word broke something open inside her that she had been keeping sealed for 3 years with nothing but mission focus and operational necessity, and the absolute refusal to grieve until she had something to grieve toward. "Reeves," she said. Her voice held. Barely. "We thought—" He stopped, swallowed, started again. "The report said you were—" "I know what the report said," she said. "I read it." He looked at her for another moment. Then his eyes went to Titan, who had moved to stand directly beside her, and something in Reeves's face that had been held rigid for a year and a half finally came apart entirely. "You brought the dog," he said. "He brought himself," she said. "He always did." Titan crossed the distance to Reeves in 4 steps and pressed his head against the man's chest. Reeves put both hands on the dog's back and bent forward, and the sound he made was not a word and did not need to be. Daniel stood 3 feet behind Natalie and said nothing. Cole was on his phone in the entrance maintaining the communications thread with the IG office, delivering the confirmation that the facility was active, that personnel were present, that the federal jurisdiction needed to expand, and it needed to expand immediately. The other 5 members of Shadow Cerberus came out one at a time. Each of them stopped when they saw her. Each of them had the same moment of recalibration, the same processing of something they had filed under. Impossible being reclassified as real. She did not allow herself to break in front of them. That was not what they needed from her. What they needed from her was exactly what she had always given them: steady, present, clear-eyed command. The certainty that the person at the front of the formation knew where they were going and believed it was worth going there. She could come apart later. She had earned it. She would use it. But not yet. "Listen to me," she said, and her voice carried the particular quality that it had always carried when she was addressing her unit. Not loud, not soft, but the exact register that cut through noise and fear and uncertainty and landed somewhere in the center of the chest. "You are going to walk out of this facility under federal protective authority. You are going to be transported to Redstone Base. You are going to receive medical evaluation, legal representation, and full access to the disclosure proceedings. The people who put you here are being named in a federal investigation that is active and moving right now." She looked at each face. "This is over." Reeves looked at her. Greer. Named. Hargrove. Named. The network. Documented. Financially traced. Legally exposed. She held his gaze. "It's done, Reeves. We got there." He straightened. The others straightened. The specific involuntary straightening of military personnel hearing, something that reorganizes their understanding of their situation from one category into another. "How long?" Reeves asked. "The disclosure was filed 2 hours ago," she said. "Federal jurisdiction is being established as we stand here." "No," he said. He looked at her steadily. "How long did it take you?" The question sat in the air between them. How long did it take you? Not how long were we here. How long did it take you? 3 years of being dead. Of carrying 11 names and a mission and a dog and a grief so organized it had become a tactical asset. Of building toward a moment in a training yard where a Belgian Malinois sat at her feet, and an instructor asked the question that started pulling the whole thread loose. 3 years, she said. Reeves nodded once, slowly, like that number landed exactly where it needed to. "Worth it," he said. She looked at him. At all of them. At Titan, who had returned to her side and was leaning his full weight against her left leg, the way he had been doing since the morning at the perimeter fence, when everything had finally started moving. "You're standing here," she said. "Ask me something harder." Cole finished the federal coordination call at the same moment Natalie was moving the unit toward the facility exit. He fell into step beside her with his phone still in his hand, and his face carrying the careful expression of someone managing simultaneous relief and incoming complexity. "Marshals are 20 minutes out," he said. "IG has formally expanded the disclosure scope to cover the facility and its personnel. Greer's been contacted for voluntary interview and declined, which means he's already lawyered up. Hargrove's office issued a statement 40 minutes ago calling the disclosure politically motivated." He paused. "Which means they're scared." "Good," Natalie said. "There's something else." His voice dropped slightly. Base Command received a communication from Greer's office 45 minutes ago before the marshals were contacted before the facility situation was confirmed. The communication was directed to Voss. It was an order to detain you pending a security review. Natalie stopped walking. "Voss received that order." "He did?" Cole said. He held her gaze. "He filed it in his outbox, unread. And then he came and found me and told me to tell you to move faster." She looked at Cole for a long moment. Then she looked back at the 6 members of her team moving toward the exit at Reeves, walking with Titan at his side, like the past 18 months were already being sorted into the category of things that had happened and been survived, rather than things that were still happening. Voss had received an order from a 2-star admiral to detain her, and he had chosen in the exact same quiet, deliberate way that she had chosen to go back for Harmon on the march. The way Daniel had chosen to file a report he knew would cost him his career, the harder thing. Not the sanctioned thing. The right thing. She thought about what she had said to him in his office. 48 hours, Chief. Then you'll know everything. He had given her 48 hours. He had given her more than that. "When this is done," she said to Cole, "I want that man to have every commendation this installation can generate." "I'll start the paperwork," Cole said. The first federal vehicle appeared on the access road as they reached the facility entrance. Then a second. Then a third, the institutional machinery of accountability, arriving with the specific weight of something that had been in motion for longer than anyone could see, finally reaching the moment it had been building toward. Natalie stood at the entrance with Titan beside her and watched the vehicles approach. Behind her 6 members of Shadow Cerberus stood in the light for the first time in 18 months. Ahead of her, a federal investigation was about to reach 2 of the most senior officers in the Naval Special Warfare Command structure. And 40 miles south at Redstone Base, a training yard full of recruits were going about their morning routine, completely unaware that the quiet woman who had been among them for 17 days, the one who had been locked in a cage mocked, challenged, pushed to every edge Voss could find, had spent every one of those 17 days executing the most important mission of her career. Without a rank, without a record, without anything except the certainty that her people were worth coming back for. The first federal marshal stepped out of the lead vehicle and looked at her. "Commander Hayes," he said. She hadn't heard that name spoken by someone who knew what it meant in 3 years. "Yes," she said. It felt like putting down something very heavy. It felt like picking something back up. The federal marshals moved through the facility with the quiet efficiency of people executing a process that had been set in motion and could not now be stopped by anything short of an act of Congress. Natalie watched them work and felt something she hadn't felt in 3 years. The specific sensation of a weight transferring from her shoulders to an institutional structure large enough to carry it. Not disappearing, not resolved, but held by something other than her alone for the first time since she had walked out of a kill box with a dog and a broken radio, and the understanding that no one was coming to help her. Reeves stayed close. Not because he needed to. He was steady. Always had been the kind of officer who processed shock privately and presented function publicly, but because proximity felt necessary after 18 months of a facility that had been designed to maintain them without connecting them to anything real. He stood near her the way Titan stood near her. Like her presence was a fixed point in a world that had been moving without landmarks. "How many people know?" he asked quietly, watching the marshals coordinate with Cole. "Cole. Daniel Brooks' former army signals. He's a recruit here. Voss." "Voss," Reeves repeated. "The instructor who put you in the cage." "The same." Reeves was quiet for a moment. "And he helped." "He chose to," she said. "Which is different from being assigned to." Reeves looked at her sideways. "You sound like you respect him." "I do," she said. "He's the kind of man who does the wrong thing for the right reasons until he understands the distinction. Then he adjusts." She paused. "That's more than most people manage." Reeves absorbed this. Then, the others. Hargrove and Greer. What happens to them? Federal investigation. Full scope. The financial trail goes back 4 years. Meridian's contracts the black site funding the network they built to move money through classified channels. Reed has already given a full statement. The communications records are documented. The facility is confirmed active. She looked at him directly. "There's nowhere for them to go, Reeves. The architecture is exposed. Every load-bearing wall. People like that have resources," he said. "Lawyers, connections. They'll fight it." "Yes," she said. "They'll fight it in federal court with a documented financial trail, 6 recovered personnel, a communications intercept chain, and a protected disclosure that's already in the hands of the Inspector General. They can fight as hard as they want." She held his gaze. "They're going to lose." He nodded, slowly. The nod of a man filing something under resolved and moving to the next item. "What happens to us?" he said. "The unit." Full reinstatement of records. Official acknowledgement that the incident report was falsified. Back pay rank continuity medical support. She paused. And a formal inquiry into the original mission authorization that killed the others. Their families get the truth. Not the operational loss cover story. The truth. Reeves closed his eyes for exactly 3 seconds. When he opened them, they were clear. Good, he said. "That's what matters most." "I know," she said. "It's why I came back." The drive back to Redstone took 40 minutes with federal escort. 3 vehicles' lights moving south through the federal land at a speed that communicated urgency without chaos. Natalie rode with her unit in the second vehicle, Titan across her feet. The 6 of them filling a space that felt simultaneously too small and exactly right. The compressed immediate intimacy of people who had served together being in the same physical space again after too long apart. Nobody talked much. They didn't need to. The silence was the comfortable kind, not the silence of people who had nothing to say, but the silence of people who had too much and had agreed without discussion to let it wait until there was more time and more space and less adrenaline in the air. Sergeant First Class, Mia Torres, the unit's youngest member, who had been 26 when the mission deployed and was now 29 and carried 18 months of confinement in the set of her jaw, and the way her eyes moved to every exit in every room, sat beside Natalie and said nothing for 30 miles. Then she said, "Titan looks good." "He's been on base," Natalie said. "Regular training rotation. They thought he was a difficult animal." Torres almost smiled. "He is a difficult animal." "He's selective," Natalie said. "Same thing depending on who's asking." Torres looked at the dog. "He knew, didn't he? When you came in, he recognized you." "Immediately. Before you even spoke." "Yes." Torres was quiet again. Then, "That's the thing about dogs. They don't have the capacity to pretend something isn't what it is. They just know, and they tell you." She looked at Natalie. "He told the whole base who you were before you said a single word." "That was the plan," Natalie said. "Or part of it. I needed proximity to the base. I needed a cover that held. I didn't plan on Voss putting me in the cage, but when he did, Titan made it into something useful." "You used it." "I used everything," she said simply. "That's what the mission required." Torres nodded. Then, "The ones we lost, in the kill box." Her voice was steady, but thin at the edges. "Do their families know yet that it wasn't what the report said?" "Not yet," Natalie said. That's the next step. The IG process will produce a formal record correction. The families will be notified through official channels with full documentation. She paused. And I will go personally, to every one of them. That's not something I'm delegating. Torres looked at her for a moment. They'll want to know why it took 3 years. Yes, Natalie said. I'll tell them. And what will you say? Natalie looked out the vehicle window at the federal land moving past. That I spent every day of those 3 years making sure that when I did come, I came with enough to finish it. Not just enough to start something that could be buried again. She turned back to Torres. I'll tell them their family member was betrayed by people who believed rank made them untouchable. And I'll tell them that it didn't. That it never does. Not in the end. Torres was quiet for the rest of the drive, but she moved her shoulder slightly until it was touching Natalie's, and she left it there. Redstone Base had changed in the 4 hours they'd been gone. The change was invisible from the outside. The buildings were the same. The training yard was the same. The recruits moving through afternoon drills were running the same circuits they always ran. But the institutional atmosphere had shifted in the particular way it shifted when something that had been moving underground finally broke the surface. People knew something had happened. They didn't know what. They moved with the slightly heightened attention of personnel who had received no official information and were therefore building their own from fragments a holding facility with an unfamiliar occupant, a base commander's closed-door meeting extending through lunch, a senior staff officer's office sitting empty. The federal convoy pulled into the restricted lot behind the administrative wing, and the base commander, a 2-star named General Patrick Walsh, who had the lean, precise energy of someone who had been managing a crisis situation for 4 hours and had chosen to manage it by understanding it rather than containing it, was waiting with the JAG officer and 2 people Natalie didn't recognize, but whose federal ID credentials Cole confirmed with a nod. Walsh looked at the 6 members of Shadow Cerberus stepping out of the vehicle, and his face moved through something that a general's training worked hard to suppress and didn't entirely succeed. He looked at Natalie. Commander Hayes. General Walsh, I've spent the last 4 hours reading a disclosure package that I want to tell you. I find difficult to believe, he said. And I've spent the same 4 hours looking at the evidence attached to it, which makes it entirely impossible not to. He paused. I owe you an apology on behalf of this installation. The installation didn't do this, she said. Specific people did, with specific motives. The institution held, it's why the disclosure process worked. She held his gaze. The apology I need is the one that goes into the formal record. The one that has Greer's name and Hargrove's name, and the words deliberate falsification attached to an official incident report. That record is being written right now, Walsh said. The IG has primary jurisdiction, but I've assigned my JAG officer as institutional liaison. Everything this base has that supports the disclosure is available. He looked at the unit behind her. These personnel will receive full medical evaluation, legal representation, and temporary housing on this base, pending the formal reinstatement process. I've ordered it. Thank you, General. Walsh nodded. Then, in a slightly different register, less formal, more direct. The recruit cover, 17 days. Read monitoring base communications. A facility 40 miles north that I had no knowledge of operating under a classification that should have required my awareness. He stopped. How long has my base been used as a staging point for this? 14 months based on the communications records, Cole said, stepping forward. Reed's access logs trace back that far. The facility predates his involvement. It was established approximately 30 months ago under Hargrove's authorization. Walsh absorbed this with the controlled stillness of a man who was going to be very angry about something for a very long time, but had chosen to process that anger after the immediate situation was resolved. All right, he said. Let's get your people inside. Voss was waiting in the corridor outside the medical wing. I wasn't supposed to be there. The area had been designated restricted during the federal coordination process, and restricted meant restricted. And Voss had spent 11 years enforcing exactly that principle on everyone who moved through his training program. He was there anyway, standing with his arms crossed and his jaw set, and the expression of a man who had decided that being where he had no authority to be was less uncomfortable than being where he was supposed to be, while something this significant was happening 40 feet away. He saw Natalie and straightened. She stopped. Behind her, the unit was being directed through the medical wing entrance by Walsh's staff. Reeves caught her eye as he passed and gave her a look that was mostly question. She gave him a slight nod that said, "Go ahead," and then it was just her and Voss in the corridor. "They're alive," he said. Not a question. He had read it in her face before she said anything. 6 of them, she said. The other 5 didn't make it out of the kill box, but 6 are alive. Voss's jaw tightened. He looked at the ceiling for a moment, the specific gesture of someone managing an emotion they hadn't prepared for. 18 months in that facility. Yes. Under Hargrove's authority. And Greer's. He looked back at her. "I received an order this morning, from Greer's office, to detain you. Cole told me. I filed it unread." "I know," she said. "Chief, I need to say something," he said. "And I need you to let me say it without interrupting because it's not something I say often, and if I stop, I won't start again." She waited. "I put you in that cage," he said, "in front of 50 people, to humiliate you, because I read your silence as arrogance, and I decided the appropriate response to arrogance was public exposure. I was wrong about what your silence was. I was wrong about what public exposure would accomplish. And I was wrong, fundamentally operationally wrong in my belief that breaking people was the same as building them." He stopped. "I've been running this program for 11 years on the assumption that pressure reveals character. And it does. But I've been applying the wrong kind of pressure for the wrong reasons and calling it methodology." He held her gaze. "You showed me the difference. Not by telling me. By doing it differently every single day while I was actively trying to stop you." Natalie looked at him for a long moment. "The cage didn't break me," she said. "Not because I'm unbreakable. Because I'd already been through the thing that was designed to break me, and I was still standing. Your cage was just a cage." She paused. "But what you said just now that matters more than you know. Because the recruits you've still got in that yard are not me. They haven't been through what I've been through. And some of them will break under the wrong kind of pressure before they get the chance to find out what they're made of. That's the loss. That's what changes if you change the way you run this program." Voss was quiet. "The recruit named Harmon," she said. "The one who went down on the march." "He's still in the program," Voss said. "Top third of his cohort." "Because someone came back for him," she said. "Not because someone left him to figure it out alone." She held Voss's gaze. "That's the methodology, right there." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he extended his hand. She shook it. "Commander Hayes," he said. "It's a privilege." "Chief Voss," she said. "Take care of your people." She walked into the medical wing. He stood in the corridor alone for a while. Then he walked back to his training yard and looked at the recruits running their afternoon circuits and saw them for perhaps the first time. Not as assets and liabilities, but as people who had come here carrying things he couldn't see and were trying to build something out of what they had. He made 3 changes to the training schedule before dinner. Daniel found her 2 hours later, sitting outside the medical wing on the steps Titan beside her, both of them doing the thing they did, being still together in a way that communicated more than movement. He sat down on the step below her. The same position she had taken in the library the night she had almost told him everything. He didn't know if that was intentional. He thought maybe it was. "How are they?" he said. "Physically manageable. They were maintained. Not well, but maintained." She paused. "Psychologically, it's going to take time. 18 months of controlled confinement, no outside contact, no information about the investigation, or the disclosure, or whether anyone was looking." She looked at her hands. They had no way of knowing if anyone was coming. "But you were coming," Daniel said. "They didn't know that." "But you were." She looked at him. "Yes." I was quiet for a moment. "Reeves, when he saw you, what did he say?" "He called me boss," she said. "And then he saw Titan, and he fell apart a little," which was the right response. She almost smiled. "Reeves never fell apart over anything in 8 years of operations. I think he'd been saving it. Daniel looked at Titan, who acknowledged his gaze with the brief, dignified attention of an animal that had earned the right to decide who got its full focus. "The dog knew," Daniel said. "From the first minute in the cage, he recognized you." "He always knew me better than I knew myself," she said. "That's what 8 years does. You stop being two separate decision-making systems, and you become one distributed system. His instincts become your information, and your commands become his instincts. You stop being handler and animal. You become something that functions as a unit." She paused. "When I lost my team, I still had him. And when I had nothing else to navigate by, I navigated by him. If he moved, I moved. If he went still, I went still." She looked at the dog. "He brought me out of the kill box, literally. He sensed the ambush before I did, and he pulled away from the formation, and I followed because I had learned to follow before I had time to think." She was quiet for a moment. "He saved my life. And then he became the reason I kept going. Because you can't explain to a dog that the mission is impossible. They don't have that concept. They just keep working." Daniel absorbed this. "And now he gets to rest," she said. "He's earned it. What about you?" She looked at the training yard in the distance where the afternoon drills were winding down, and recruits were moving toward the mess in the tired, purposeful way of people who had done hard things and were ready to stop doing them temporarily. "I have testimony to give," she said. "Formal proceedings, record corrections, families to visit." She paused. "And a unit to see through the reinstatement process. 6 people who need institutional support and legal representation, and someone who understands what they've been through well enough to translate it into terms the process can work with." "That's a lot of work," Daniel said. "Yes," she agreed. And after, she was quiet for long enough that he thought she wasn't going to answer. "Then, I've been running towards something for 3 years. Full speed, no deviation. Everything focused on one point. I haven't thought much about what's after the point." She paused. "I think I'll figure that out when I get there." Daniel nodded. "Then, for what it's worth, you came back for all of them. Your unit. Harmon on the march. Titan in the facility with Reed." He stopped. "You came back for everyone. That's the job," she said. "No," he said. "That's you. The job is what you're ordered to do. What you did is what you chose." He held her gaze. "Those aren't the same thing." She looked at him for a moment with the same directness she had been looking at him with since the first time he sat down near her in the intake yard, and she hadn't moved away. "You chose too," she said. 3 years ago when you filed that report, you didn't know what it was connected to. You couldn't have. But you saw something wrong, and you wrote it down and handed it in, knowing exactly what it was going to cost you." She held his gaze. "You chose too, Brooks. Don't minimize it." He looked at the ground between his feet. "My separation papers say medical," he said. "Everyone who knew me from before understood what it actually meant. I've been carrying that for 3 years. The version of myself that filed a report that went nowhere and cost everything and didn't change anything. It changed something," she said. "You named the surveillance operation in an official record. That record was suppressed, but it existed. When Cole ran his full disclosure package, your report, the one from 3 years ago, was in the supporting documentation. It's part of the evidentiary chain." She paused. "You started a chain that you didn't get to see completed. But it's in the case file, Brooks. Your name is in the case file on the right side." He looked up at her. She held his gaze steadily. "It wasn't for nothing," she said. "None of it was." 6 weeks later, Rear Admiral Stephen Greer was formally charged with conspiracy falsification of military records, accessory to unlawful imprisonment, and 4 additional counts related to the unauthorized operation of a classified facility. He entered a plea of not guilty through his legal team and made no public statement. Vice Admiral Marcus Hargrove was charged with 2 additional counts directing the elimination of active military personnel and misappropriation of classified defense funding. His legal team filed a motion challenging federal jurisdiction that was denied within 72 hours. He was placed on administrative leave pending trial. Captain Reed accepted a plea agreement in exchange for full cooperation with the federal investigation. His testimony provided the financial documentation chain that tied Hargrove directly to the Meridian Defense Solutions payments, and through those payments to the operational authorization of the Killbox mission. The plea agreement was described by the federal prosecutor as the most complete piece of cooperative testimony she had received in 14 years. Meridian Defense Solutions had its government contracts terminated, and its principals referred for federal prosecution. The 6 members of Shadow Cerberus were formally reinstated to active duty with full record correction. The incident report declaring them operational losses was struck from the official record and replaced with a formal acknowledgement of unlawful imprisonment and conspiracy. Their personnel files were restored, their ranks confirmed, and their service records amended to reflect the full scope of their operational history, including the missions that had previously existed only in classified rooms and sealed files. The families of the 5 operators who had died in the Killbox received formal notification from the Secretary of the Navy. The notification acknowledged that the original incident report had been falsified, that their family members had died as a result of a deliberate and unauthorized operation conducted by senior officers acting outside their authority, and that the military took full institutional responsibility for the failure to protect them. Natalie visited each family personally. She did not bring rank or uniform. She brought the truth unredacted, complete, and delivered in the specific, careful way of someone who understood that the people she was sitting across from had been carrying a falsified version of events for 3 years and deserved the real one, regardless of how hard it was to hear. Some of them were angry. She let them be angry. She didn't defend the institution. She sat with them in it. Some of them wept. She stayed. Some of them asked questions she didn't have complete answers to. She said so and told them what she did know and promised to tell them more as the investigation produced it. Every family at the end said the same thing in different words. Thank you for coming back. She drove home from the last visit on a Thursday evening in late autumn with Titan in the passenger seat, and the specific exhaustion of someone who has completed something that required everything they had and has nothing left to perform for anyone. She drove for an hour without music or radio. Then she pulled over and put her hands on the steering wheel and let out a breath that had been building for 3 years. Titan put his head on her shoulder. She let him. The day Natalie Hayes returned to Redstone Base in an official capacity, not as Emily Carter, not as a recruit, not as a ghost. The training yard was running its morning drills in the cold early light of a day that felt ordinary until it didn't. She arrived in uniform, commander's insignia, her actual name on the identification that passed through the front gate. The gate officer looked at her ID, looked at her face and said, "Welcome back, Commander," in the tone of someone who had heard the story and understood exactly how much weight those 2 words carried. She walked through the base with Titan at her left side. The recruits saw her. Some of them recognized her from the stories that had moved through the base with the unstoppable momentum of things that were true and extraordinary. The woman in the cage, the dog that sat at her feet, the recruit who turned out to be the operator, whose name was taught only in classified rooms. Some of them didn't know the story and simply saw a commander and a K9 moving through the yard with the particular quality of shared purpose that made people stop and look. Harmon saw her from across the drill ground. He stopped what he was doing. He stood straight. And then he did something that nobody had told him to do, and nobody would have expected from a recruit who had been carried through 9 miles of a march on the borrowed certainty of a woman who refused to let him stop. He saluted. Not the formal required salute of lower rank to higher. The other kind. The kind that meant something specific. Natalie stopped walking. She returned it. Voss saw this from the far side of the yard. He said nothing. He turned back to his training group and continued the drill without commentary. But Daniel, standing near the obstacle course with his own cohort, caught the expression on Voss's face in the moment before he turned, and it was the face of a man who had changed something fundamental in himself, and was watching the evidence of that change play out in real time, and was quietly and without ceremony glad. Natalie found the memorial. It was in the corner of the yard where the K9 containment cage had stood. The cage itself was gone. Walsh had ordered it removed 3 weeks into the investigation, when the base began the process of examining which of its structures and practices had been built on fear rather than purpose. In its place, a simple installation, a wall with 11 names engraved in stone. The 5 members of Shadow Cerberus who had died in the kill box. 6 operators from other classified units who had been lost in connected operations that the federal investigation had uncovered in the course of building its case against Hargrove and Greer. 11 names, people who had been erased, who now had their names on a wall that anyone on the base could read. Titan walked to the wall and sat in front of it. Natalie stood beside him and looked at the names one at a time. She knew 4 of the 11 personally. She had served with them, eaten with them, deployed with them into situations where the margin between going home and not going home was measured in seconds and decisions. She knew their voices. She knew the specific ways each of them had been difficult, and the specific ways each of them had been extraordinary. She said each of their names quietly under her breath. Not a ceremony, not a performance, just the act of saying the names of the dead to someone who would hear them, which was in the end all the dead ever needed. When she finished, she put her hand flat against the stone. The stone was cold. The names were permanent. The people who had tried to make them disappear were going to prison. She stood there for a long time. Then she straightened, adjusted her uniform, and walked back into the training yard where the recruits were running and the morning was continuing, and the work of building something better out of the wreckage of what had failed was ongoing and necessary and nowhere near finished. Daniel was waiting at the edge of the yard. "How'd it feel?" he said. "Coming through the gate with your actual name." "Strange," she said. "And right, both at the same time." He nodded. "What happens now?" "Walsh offered me a position," she said. "Formal instructor role, K9 Integration Program Development, building a training structure that incorporates what Shadow Cerberus developed into the standard Special Operations pipeline." She paused. "And a seat on the Oversight Review Board that's being established to close the institutional gaps that let Hargrove's network operate for as long as it did." "You're staying," Daniel said. "For now," she said. "There's still work here." He looked at the training yard, at Harmon running the obstacle course with a precision that hadn't been there 8 weeks ago, at the new cohort of recruits moving through the morning drills with the specific mix of uncertainty and determination that every first week produced, at Voss moving along the formation line with a different quality in his approach, still demanding, still precise, but the demand coming from a different place now. From investment instead of dominance. "Good," Daniel said. She looked at him. "What about you?" "Walsh offered me reinstatement," he said. "Full record correction, the separation reclassified," he paused, "and a position on the Signals Intelligence Review Panel, assessing the vulnerabilities that Reed's operation exploited." "Are you taking it?" He was quiet for a moment. "Yeah," he said. "I think I am." She nodded. "Good." They stood together for a moment at the edge of the training yard, watching the morning move forward. Titan sat between them, his attention moving between the recruits and the memorial wall and the wide sky above the base, the way a dog's attention moved, present in all directions, simultaneously missing nothing. "One thing," Daniel said. "I need to know one thing." "What?" "The cage," he said. "That first day. When Voss put you in there and Titan came to you and the whole yard went quiet." He looked at her. "Were you scared?" Natalie considered the question. She had been in kill boxes. She had been declared dead. She had operated for 3 years under a false identity in a facility connected to the people who wanted her buried, moving through each day, knowing that a single missed step would close the window permanently. She had held a dying man's arm in a field with nothing but her hands and a tourniquet, and the absolute refusal to accept that this was how it ended. She had stood in a facility 40 miles north and seen 6 faces that she had been afraid for 3 years she would never see again. She had been scared for all of it. She was still here. "Yes," she said. "I was scared." "But you walked in anyway." "That's all courage ever is," she said. "Walking in anyway." She looked at the training yard, at the memorial wall, at the names that would not disappear. At the base that was already becoming something different from what it had been. At the recruits, who would train under a program that had been changed fundamentally, structurally, irreversibly changed because a woman had walked into a cage and a dog had known who she was before anyone else did. The strongest warriors, she said quietly, are not the ones who were never broken. They are the ones who were broken and who chose every single day through everything to come back. She put her hand on Titan's head. He leaned into it, and Commander Natalie Hayes walked back into the yard where her work was waiting, carrying nothing she didn't choose to carry, leaving nothing behind that needed to stay.